Although blockbuster movies are dominated by highly paid actors and actresses, the biggest star in Hollywood is a director. Steven Spielberg's movies contain some of the most iconic images of modern cinema. And everyone, but everyone, can hum the theme tunes. Da, 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 da. Bum, 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 bum. Do, 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 do.
Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, no, you can't give me that. You can't make me say that it's on film here.
Oh, there's always one, isn't there? But though his movies draw huge crowds and take hundreds of millions of dollars, there are those who find Spielberg showy, melodramatic, and worst of all, sentimental.
A little saccharine for my taste. He likes that slightly embarrassing emotional moment.
So what kind of filmmaker does he think he is? For this special edition of The Culture Show, we've come here to Hollywood to meet Steven Spielberg on his home turf. To find out how the director, once dubbed the Peter Pan of movies, feels about turning 60.
Hello, interviewer. Hello, cast. He's now 60. Catching up.
Spielberg's life in movies began here over 40 years ago. In those days, he was just another punter on a tour of Universal Studios. But according to legend, young Steven jumped off the tour bus, hid in a toilet, and before anyone noticed, had set himself up in a disused office.
Well, that's pretty much the truth.
Well, that really happened?
Yeah, I mean, it started out with my taking a tour, and I walked just into a random doorway. It was one of the luckiest doorways I ever opened in my life, and asked this gentleman who was the head librarian for Universal Studios if I could use his telephone. And when I used the phone and I asked for a ride, and I told my story to my cousin, and he overheard this, and he said, "Did you really get off the bus and just wander around? What do you want to do with yourself?" And I said, "I want to be a director," and this was the best idea I had to be able to watch, other directors working. And he took an interest in me, and he gave me a pass to come back the next day. And I came back on the lot the fourth day, and I just took a chance. Instead of showing Scotty, the guard, my pink pass, I waved to him, and he looked up and just waved me onto the lot without checking my papers. And I was in, it was summer vacation from high school, and I came on the lot every single day of a working week for the entire summer vacation. And I found an office that wasn't being used. I moved into the building, and there was a telephone. It was connected somehow.
And by the time they figured out that you were there, you were set and it was okay.
Everybody assumed I was related to someone working on the lot, probably related to an executive. So nobody really chased after me and threw me off the lot.
Once inside, Spielberg used his short film Amblin to attract the attention of studio boss Sid Sheinberg. Here's a rare glimpse of the film that became his calling card.
That's what Sid Sheinberg saw, and that's the movie. He entrusted me with a 7-year contract. That was the one that got me inside with a real pass to have a real office and a real secretary inside Universal Studios.
How old were you?
21.
21.
Yeah.
What was it about you that made you able to do that? And not just that you had made these films before, but you must have had some, charismatic quality that made people go, this kid's really good. Because didn't Joan Crawford famously tell somebody from the Hollywood press, "You don't want to speak to me, you want to speak to him because this guy's going to be big"?
Well, she never sat in front of me.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's true or not. What she said behind my back to Lou Wasserman was, "Oh my God, I'm so offended. Why did you have this little kid directing me? I'm Joan Crawford. Why couldn't, where's King Vidor? Where's, she took down a list of names of people that she would rather have direct her in this TV movie. But Lou stuck with me and defended me and said, "Look, Joan, if I have to make a choice between you and this director, it's going to be this director." And I'll never forget Lou for that.
Spielberg's infiltration of a Hollywood studio was in direct contrast to the rebellious independence of New York contemporaries like Martin Scorsese and Brian De Palma. While they battled against the system, Spielberg had a completely different career plan.
I didn't know that there was guerrilla warfare out there in New York City and Brooklyn, and the Bronx and other parts of the world where filmmakers were scraping together $50,000 and going out and making feature films. I didn't know this world existed.
Sure.
I read books and I saw movies, and all the books were about the golden era of Hollywood, and so it was the establishment that attracted me. Not because it was the establishment, because it seemed like they had the best toys. Big cameras, big lights, big movie stars, tremendous sets, and a filmography that, to this day is the greatest body of work in terms of a nation that has made movies a global tradition. It started here.
Spielberg went on to direct a string of hits for Universal, which touched a chord with the movie-going public, making hundreds of millions of dollars in the process.
The list of films that Steven has produced and Steven has directed, it's an extraordinary volume of work.
Spielberg's CV is extraordinary and extraordinarily diverse. Think about it. The man who directed Jaws also directed Schindler's List. The character piece Catch Me If You Can came from the same creator as Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And The Colour Purple was adapted by the same filmmaker who took on Jurassic Park.
I think Steven's interested in lots of different subjects. I think that's why he does move in many different directions with the choices that he makes. And I think he's much like the audience. I think he likes to go to different kinds of movies, and consequently he likes to make different kinds of films.
The roots of Spielberg's identification with the audience lie in his early carnivalesque experiences of being in a packed movie house.
The first movie I ever saw was Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth.
Right.
Which I thought was an actual circus my father was taking me to. It turned out to be cinema. So my first initial reaction to that was tremendous disappointment. It wasn't long after my disappointment, gave way to extreme exhilaration and fear of this new medium that was frightening me, and sure, images were washing over me, especially this train crash. This epic train wreck where a car hits the train buckles, and people fall out of their, sleeper berths, and it's a complete disaster.
These are scary images. These are images that invoke fear. It sounds to me like that's almost a primary impulse for you, falling in love with the potential fear that cinema can create in you.
Well, I've been afraid of most everything most of my life, so falling in love with fear is something that it was in my DNA.
Okay. What were you frightened of?
Just about everything. Nothing I wasn't. The dark, small enclosures. People talking too loud. My imagination. I was afraid of my imagination, which in the dark, in the night, was too provocative when I was a young child. But film wasn't really, for me, a way of exorcising anything that I wanted to get rid of. In fact, it was a way of collecting things that I wanted to keep with me the rest of my life. To be able to actually, freeze moments and freeze ideas and keep them going on forever.
One image Spielberg has held on to throughout his life is that of a giant fire-breathing lizard.
I really loved Godzilla. I loved it because it was primal, and there was no stopping it. It didn't even occur to me that there might have been something deeply primal in the Japanese reaction to the bombings, our bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and creating a monster from the depth based on, radiation. All I could think about was it was one of the scariest things I'd ever seen.
The ghost of Godzilla, with its terrific blend of shocks and substance, lives on in Duel, one of Spielberg's earliest films in which a monstrous truck chases Dennis Weaver across America. Originally made for TV, this rip-roaring thriller, which subtly dramatizes a crisis in masculinity beneath the veneer of a car chase, became a cult classic.
I was so amazed that he had taken such a thin idea and managed to make it work so powerfully over such a long period of time. It's like this amazing balancing act.
I'd like to report a truck driver that's been endangering my life.
This is not just technically good, but it's actually he really made it cinematically work in a way that It's very hard to do.
The noise that we hear when the truck finally goes off the edge of the cliff, what is it?
It's Godzilla. It's Godzilla screaming in Tokyo Harbor. And I kind of bootlegged it and put it in Duel because I thought there was some kind of a metaphor between that Leviathan and that Japanese Leviathan.
We hear this noise again in the death throes of a much more famous monster. This one with teeth. I remember the first time I ever saw Jaws, I saw it in a cinema in Turnpike Lane in North London, and I must have been 12. And I grew up watching monster movies and Hammer movies on television particularly. And I remember that I almost lost control of my bodily functions because it was that no, but in a really good way. I don't say that I'd say that as the highest compliment. That film really worked.
I always thought that Jaws was kind of like an aquatic version of Duel. It was once again about a very large predator, chasing innocent people and consuming them, and irrationally. It was an eating machine. At the same time, I think it was my own fear of the water, because I've always been afraid of the water. I was never a very good swimmer, and that probably motivated me more than anything else to want to tell that story.
Jaws was based on a melodramatic potboiler by novelist Peter Benchley, packed with small-town intrigue and extramarital affairs. But Spielberg wanted to strip the plot right back and make it as streamlined as the shark itself, cutting straight to the chase.
The whole love affair with the ichthyologist and the sheriff's wife, I got rid of that. It was the first impulse, was to get rid of the melodrama and the soap opera aspects of the novel and go right for that third act, the hunt.
That's a 20-footer. 25. 3 tons, Alan.
When Jaws became the enormous hit that it was and kind of redefined the way in which summer movies could take money, since then there's been a legacy of what people refer to as the summer blockbuster that people say, well, it started with Jaws.
Right.
Firstly, when you were making Jaws, how much of a sense did you have that what you were making was going to be a hit?
Jaws to me was a near-death experience. A near-career-death experience. I went to a party on Martha's Vineyard. A very well-known actress came over to me and said, I just came back from L.A. Everybody says this picture is a complete stinker. It's a total failure, and nobody will ever hire you again because you're profligate and you're spending and you're responsible, and everybody's calling you responsible. I had never heard the scuttle. I didn't ever hear the noise that was coming from Hollywood about me. And I was halfway through shooting the picture, and this person tells me that my movie's a disaster. And I'm a disaster, and it's over. And I really believe for the second half of the film that this was the last time I was ever going to shoot a film in 35 millimeter.
That was it.
That was it.
Originally planned for a 55-day shoot, Jaws ran 100 days over schedule, putting Spielberg's fledgling reputation on the line.
The famous rule is don't ever work with kids, dogs, old people around the water.
There were strikes, there were storms, and even hints of mutiny from a crew often sceptical about the talents of this hippie-looking 29-year-old upstart.
You had a young person who was in the industry and in a position of being a director. That was very, very unusual in those days. And so the crew members, who were these old crusty guys, just said, this kid doesn't know what he's doing, it's ridiculous.
And to top it all, there was Bruce, the mechanical shark that simply didn't work for most of the film.
So I needed something to represent the shark.
The oil drum goes bum, 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 bum. Much more dangerous looking than the fin of the shark.
Let down by Bruce, Spielberg had to use other tricks to fill the hole where the shark should have been.
Had the shark been working, perhaps the film would have made half the money and been half as scary. It wasn't until I took the film to Dallas, Texas, to the Medallion Theater preview, and that was the first time I realized that the shark worked. The movie worked. Everything about it worked. The audience came out of their seats. Popcorn was flying in front of the screen twice during the movie, And I got greedy and thought, gee, can I make the popcorn fly out of their popcorn boxes 3 times? And that's when I shot the scene in my editor's pool, Verna's pool. And I had this idea, maybe when Richard goes underwater to dig the tooth out of the, what if Ben Gardner's entire head comes out of the hole? And so I shot it in her pool with a prosthetic head and a plywood boat.
Scaring the audience with Jack-in-the-Box shocks was a technique which Spielberg had learned from sci-fi frighteners like The Creature from the Black Lagoon and Godzilla. Unlike those B-movies, which were dismissed by contemporary critics as mere popcorn fodder, Spielberg's monster stompers always had much more going on beneath the scary surface.
Oh, Mr. Arnold.
Take his very own giant lizard epic Jurassic Park, a sentimental family drama disguised as a dinosaur thrill ride.
There were themes in the screenplay that weren't necessarily in the novel that I really was interested in exploring in Jurassic Park. A man not ready yet to have kids. A woman he loved who was ready to have children. And that was the grand divide.
Have you heard about this thing in Omni? About this, meteor making all this heat? And it made a bunch of diamond dust. And that changed the weather. And they died because of the weather. And then my teacher told me about this other book by a guy named Backer. And she said I should ride with you because it'd be good for you.
And then somehow this experience of survival inside Jurassic Park with these two kids that he has to, first he has to tolerate, and then he has to protect. And then eventually he winds up loving as though they were his own children. That was his journey. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to put a personal journey inside what basically is a theme park thrill ride.
Does it bother you at all when people write about those movies that they don't necessarily write about those themes, that what they say is, oh, you know, incredible, you know, extraordinary edge of your seat, but they say it in a way which sometimes implies, well, yes, but that's, you know, it's surface rather than depth. I mean, It
doesn't bother me at all because I think that I really don't think that without those more personal, emotional, subconscious themes, these films wouldn't be as successful with audiences. So it's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Jaws or Jurassic Park. But without those sort of subterranean, interpersonal themes, I don't think the films would have been taken personally as much as they were by audiences.
Underlining these personal themes is a shameless fondness for the big emotional punch which characterizes so much of Spielberg's cinema.
They're separating.
Yes,
Boy
definitely
and creature are separating. What does that mean?
The boy's coming back. We're losing E.T.
E.T., answer me, please.
Everything's going to be fine. Just relax.
Think about it, if you can get to the end of E.T. without bursting into floods of tears, you're probably less human than the film's titular alien. Now, personally, I have no problem with this. I love to cry in movies, but not everyone is so happy reaching for the hanky.
You know, he likes that kind of emotional, slightly embarrassing emotional moment where you let yourself go. I don't. A little saccharine for my taste, but, you know, especially toward the end.
My God, it was so moving. And also the thing is, it was not that attractive. The presentation of what it was, it's a bit, they say, pili-wally. But, by God, it caught you.
I'll be right here.
I've made films that were designed to be sentimental, and when the critics call them sentimental, they were right to call them that, because that's exactly how I intended them. And so, and there's nothing wrong with sentimentality. I mean, Frank Capra was sentimental. John Ford in many of his films was one of the most sentimental directors for many decades. I think there's value in sentimental works as long as the sentimentality be somewhat disguised. E.T. came out of, you know, two places in my life. One, my experience of my mom and dad getting a divorce when I was 16. And the other experience was feeling like I had all my life been on the outside of, you know, of where I wished I was. As a Jewish boy or as just a geeky kid. I was both. And I did my best to find my way into the inner circle. Sometimes it was hiring the head of the football team to star in my latest Western when I was 14 years old. I think all of these themes come back in E.T., especially the theme of Elliot on the outside searching for a soulmate. It was Elliot looking, to find out or to discover why he was so lonely and why he was always so sad. And I think if E.T. hadn't come to the rescue, Elliot would have made up the equivalent, soulmate for himself.
I'm 4'6". You must be around 3.
That probably truly is my most personal film, because that's the first film I made that was about something that had happened to me in my life.
The emotional impact is underscored throughout by the music of longtime collaborator John Williams.
It's too bumpy. We'll have to walk from here.
For me, it presented a wonderful opportunity, I thought, for music to enhance that kind of emotional ride. He has the ability to stay in touch with childlike aspects of his imagination. Case of great directors, and we're talking about one, I think, in Spielberg, the audience actually gets to know the man or the woman as a result of the work.
Don't crash, please.
All movies they just measure who you are. The movies are the greatest proof that we change, often drastically from decade to decade, if not some of us from year to year. And all the movies in my life, I couldn't go back and make those same movies today because I'm not the same person I am in 2006 to the way I was in 1982, for instance, with E.T., or 1977 with, Close Encounters.
The thing that's central to Close Encounters is the idea of the conflicted father who's desperately trying to resolve his own personal conflicts. But in doing so, he kind of abandons his family. It's a strangely sort of conflicted story, isn't it?
It is, and I won't get into any kind of psychoanalysis about where that came from in my life, except to say that if I had it to do all over again, and I came up with the story today with 7 children, I wouldn't have made the choice to have the central character get on the mothership and go exploring, abandoning his family. But in the naivety of being a bachelor and being single and having no dependents, it was really easy for me to explore my own obsession with the great beyond by having my alter ego, Richard Dreyfuss, get on the mothership and fly away. Making movies, you work a lot of stuff out. I mean, you can pay a psychiatrist, I guess, a lot of money to work stuff out, or you can have people pay you a lot of money to work stuff out through the movies. I like the latter.
Alongside the sci-fi and horror B-movies of his childhood, another early influence on Spielberg was World War II. While his filmmaking contemporaries have been obsessed with Vietnam, Spielberg's films have returned to this subject time and time again. From the boy's own adventure of Raiders of the Lost Ark, with its comic book Nazi villains, to the more brutal realities of Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List. It's a war which has preoccupied Spielberg from the very first day that he picked up a movie camera. Indeed, courtesy of Spielberg himself, here's one he made earlier. Much earlier.
I was about 13, 14 years old, and we had an airport called Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix, Arizona, and there were a lot of World War II planes just sitting around on the tarmac out there. And I went to the airport, I went to some person at the airport, I forgot who it was, and I said, I'm making a little home movie for school, for school, is it possible we could get into the cockpit of one of these World War II airplanes? And he said, absolutely, unlock the cockpit, and we got in.
And you sat your friends in them, filmed them, and then intercut it with dogfight footage?
Yeah, I found, an 8mm. You can go to any camera store and buy basically documentary footage of World War II, so I just basically looked at that first, selected the shots, and I just backed my story into the existing World War II footage that I could get my hands on.
So, from a very early age, you're making films about World War II, and obviously throughout your career, I mean, what is it about World War II that has that personal ring for you that makes it worthy of constant investigation?
Well, I think my father is really responsible for filling my head full of stories about World War II. And
your father was a...
My father was a radio operator on a B-25. He was part of the 490th Bomber Squadron called the Burma Bridge Busters. He was very proud of his service in the Second World War, and he always told me World War II stories. So I think from my earliest days of childhood, World War II was the favorite topic of discussion around the house.
And it is a classic battle in which the sides are clearly defined. There is good and there is bad. And I think you were once quoted as having said it was a collision between innocence and extreme jeopardy. Mm-hmm. Is that an accurate description of how you felt about it?
Yeah, I did. I really did. I felt that it was very much about, you can't get more innocent in World War II than kids that had never left their states, let alone left their own country. And they came from the steel mills, they came from the farms, they came from driving taxis, they came from school, they came from high school and college. And they came from their mom and dad's houses and their own bedrooms to suddenly be in these foxholes, in the middle of Europe and in these horrible jungle conditions in the Pacific. And it was the end of their innocence forever. But it was going from the most extreme innocence to the most extremely personal levels of danger and terror that anybody could possibly imagine.
Son of a bitch. More sulfur, Mellis. Listen to my voice. We're going to be all right. We're going to be all right, John.
Wait, you're fine. You're going on a hospital.
More sulfur.
In terms of the opening movement of Saving Private Ryan, it is this extreme, the cinematic rendering of exactly what you're talking about, of being in the moment, of actually being there. Describe for me exactly what's going on in your mind as a director, what you're putting the audience through in that landing sequence.
I thought that the only way I could experience combat was to shoot my entire movie in continuity, which is a very expensive and impractical proposition. I've only done it once before. And because of that, my company, my cast, and the crew took the beach literally 7 feet at a time. Because we started in the landing craft, and then a couple days later, the Higgins boat gates fell down, and these boys were being shot to pieces. On the 4th day of shooting, they were just hiding behind the hedgehogs and the Belgian gates. By the 11th or 12th day of shooting, they had finally made it to the seawall, just below the passes, the Vierville Pass. And so we actually took the beach one step at a time, the way they did that morning of June 6th.
What a view.
I had this idea that I wanted to vibrate the shots whenever an explosion went off. Mm-hmm. And I started by testing the camera. Long before we shot the film back here in California, I put a power drill, gaffer taped it to the side of the camera. So whenever I turned on the electric motor, the whole camera would shake. And I thought that would be the technique that I would use, and later found out there was actually a lens called the shaker lens.
Oh, that would do it for you?
It would do it for me after all that experimentation. And I thought if I took out more than half the color, it would be more like black and white than in color. It would give more of a reality to it. So I used a whole combination of techniques to try to put the audience inside those boys who were experiencing this for the first time.
There's a recon element, 2nd SS. I've been expecting a probe. That must have been it.
Captain Miller. Charlie Company, 2nd Rangers.
Corporal Henderson, Easy Company, 501st.
Ryan, 1st and 506. Gibson, telling me 3rd and 506.
James Francis, Ryan?
Yes, sir. How'd you guess that?
My father-in-law was a D-Day veteran, and he would talk about it. But in ways, it's almost impossible to explain. And yet, I have heard people who have been in those circumstances say, well, what you see in Saving Private Ryan, obviously it's not the same as being there.
You're right.
But it's getting close to what it was like.
I think greater than anything that ever happened on that movie, greater than the reviews that film got, and greater than the box office and all the other success the film achieved, and all the Oscars and stuff it won, the greatest success for us was getting the veterans to say that's very close to what it was like for me. Mm-hmm. And they said it was never exactly like Eddie, because you had to be there.
Of course.
And it didn't get close to the personal experience with the smells, but it came close to the approximation of what their memories of that experience are like today. And that was, to us, the greatest compliment we could have gotten on the movie.
Still to come on this special edition of The Culture Show, Spielberg's biggest failure and how he turned it around.
I realized that I needed to go into some kind of Betty Ford clinic for self-indulgent, overpriced directors.
And we reveal which of Spielberg's own films he's most proud of. Although he's the world's most successful director, not all of Spielberg's movies have met with glowing critical and commercial success. Take Hook, a bloated update of Peter Pan costing a massive $70 million.
How much?
In which childhood wonderment gets lost amidst misbehaving stars and overblown sets.
Peter Pan, prepare to meet thy doom.
But his biggest flop was 1941, which followed the success stories of Jaws and Close Encounters and was made at a time when Spielberg was considered the golden boy who couldn't fail. With stars like John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd and a practically unlimited budget, Spielberg indulged himself with this self-consciously zany World War II comedy.
Hiya, doll.
Guess what? The movie bombed. Big time.
1941, clearly, by many people's standards, it's a kind of flop that could have really damaged somebody's career. Why, for you, did 1941 not work with an audience? Do you think it's a good film? Do you think it's a failure of the audience, or do you think it's a failure of the film?
I think it's a good film. I didn't, I accept that film as being a total failure. I accept and take responsibility for getting carried away by thinking that I was made of Teflon, and I had had Jaws and Close Encounters back-to-back, two big hits, and I made 1941 and thought I couldn't fail with it. I really did.
He was the king of the mountain, and he could do anything he wanted. There wasn't anybody to stop him.
And I had made Close Encounters in 140 days. I had made Jaws 100 days over schedule, 155 days. Now my third movie breaks my own record. Goes 178 days.
Where are we? Where's the door?
And he was nervous about doing comedy, so he was kind of covering himself 6 ways from Sunday and, trying to do this joke and that joke and do it different ways and all that kind of stuff. So he was moving into an area that he didn't have a lot of confidence in.
God.
That really did hurt his career, because now he'd spent a ton of money, now he'd wasted a lot of time, and the movie didn't work.
And I realized that I needed to go into some kind of Betty Ford clinic for self-indulgent, overpriced directors.
Rather than Betty Ford, Spielberg checked himself into the private retreat of longtime friend George Lucas, who, in true Jedi fashion, waved his lightsaber and threw the fallen warrior a lifeline.
George asked me if I wanted to come to Hawaii with him, where he was hiding from the opening of Star Wars.
We'll sit on the beach and we'll make sandcastles. So we were doing that, and it really was, while we were building a sandcastle, he was talking about the movie that he really wanted to make, which was a James Bond film.
I had wanted to do a James Bond movie, and I had asked Cubby Broccoli twice if I could. He turned me down both times.
I said, hey, Stephen, I've got this project. It's called Indiana Jones. Well, then it was actually called Indiana Smith. But I got this film, Indiana Smith. It's kind of a supernatural adventurer Takes place in the 30s. It's like a Saturday matinee serial. It's just like James Bond, only better.
He gave me all the pep talks and gave me all the, he said, you have a chance to prove to the world that you can make this film for like $19 million and 87 days, what I originally was given to make Raiders with. And you can do it. You can prove to everybody you're not this profligate runaway director.
One studio in particular said basically, we'll do it, but you can't have Steve direct it because this is an expensive movie. It could get out of hand very easily, and we don't want this $50 million movie on our hands. And I said, that ain't going to happen.
This time it will cost you.
They made us sign sort of poison pill death contracts that if you go 10 cents over budget, they take away your life, your car, your kids, everything you own.
I always love to get a director just after they've come off something where they feel that they haven't succeeded. Because then it's a renewed application and effort.
Junior?
Yes, sir.
Raiders re-established Spielberg as Mr. Disciplined, Mr. On Time and Under Budget, using a shoot-fast style which would serve him equally well on the sequels Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade.
The tank scene was a perfect example. I get up and I say, look at what are they doing? They're firing or something from the tank. And Harrison said, we're out of range.
What do you think you're doing there? Get down! Dad, we're well out of range.
So then he went for the two-shot. He realized that he gets it all in one take with the two of us in the take responding to the same situation.
The car belongs to my brother-in-law. Come on, come on!
41 was the slap of the face that I was asking for and that I needed, and Raiders of the Lost Ark was my second chance and my redemption.
Indiana Jones. Jungles, snakes, spies, Nazis, beautiful women in peril. What could be more B-movie than that? And yet, in the midst of the Indiana Jones trilogy, Spielberg also made The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun, both adapted from respected literary sources, and both suggesting a growing seriousness of purpose.
And it was also during this period that Spielberg first began to consider a project which would ultimately cement his reputation as something more than a mere popularist. A film dealing with perhaps the most sensitive and traumatic subject of the 20th century.
Several things happened in my life. I made The Color Purple, which I think is my first adult story.
Don't talk back to me.
And for better or for worse, whether you love it or hate it, it was strictly a film about people and personalities and a culture. And then Empire of the Sun. And then I had my own son. And I think between having my first child and making those two movies, those are the things that prepared me to be able to risk telling a story of the Holocaust without bringing shame to the memories of those who survived and those who didn't. And that was my biggest fear, that if I made this film improperly, if I made it too sentimental, if I fell back on a lot of my old, visual techniques to manipulate an audience, to instruct the audience how to behave, how to react from time to time, if I told Schindler's List that way, I would do much more harm than good. So I needed to really throw away the toolbox before I took on Schindler's List.
Still, nobody knows.
It was you. You committed this crime.
No, sir.
But you know who, though?
Yes.
Who?
Him!
All the prisoners are brought out, and the guy walks through and shoots people in the head. If you know Stephen, and it's a hugely powerful emotional moment. And it's nothing, it's all done in a wide shot.
Gert lined up everybody from the missing command's barracks. He shot the man to the left of Bieski, The man to the right of him. He walked down the line shooting every other man with a pistol. 25.
It's his choice of doing it the simple way instead of the way he would normally do things, hype it up, made it infinitely more powerful for me. And that's where the brilliance was, is he pulled himself back and said, I'm going to do this from a distance.
Well, I remember distinctly when I saw Schindler's List, and they were all going into the showers, and I thought, oh, how is he going to handle this? Because they're going to get gassed. And when the water came on, it was, you could hear it in the cinema, the relief. That's perfect.
My first decision with Schindler's List was to shoot it in black and white, because I didn't want it to be beautified. I didn't want anything about Auschwitz-Birkenau to have any color in it. I didn't want anything about the Holocaust to be colorful.
There's a documentary that you were shown as a school child
called The Twisted Cross, which is in black and white. It was the first time I ever saw a dead body. And in that documentary, you showed the liberation of some of the death camps where the bodies were 15 feet piled high. And I'd never seen anything like that before as a child. I never got over those images.
And in terms of making Schindler's List, did that have for you a sort of significant character development moment in terms of the way in which you perceive your cultural identity?
I found my pride in my Jewish identity long before I made Schindler's List, or I wouldn't have made Schindler's List.
Okay.
A lot of that came when I met Kate, my wife, who converted to Judaism. She went a long way to bring me with her into her Jewish experience. And so I think that was one of the reasons I made Schindler's List.
Schindler's List earned Spielberg a new reputation as a heavyweight director. And from this point onwards in his career, there'd be an unresolved conflict between serious works such as the slave trade drama Amistad and populist fantasy hits like the Jurassic Park sequel The Lost World.
This tension between Spielberg the entertainer and Spielberg the artist came to a head with AI, artificial intelligence, on which he collaborated with critics' favourite Stanley Kubrick, director of 2001 and A Clockwork Orange. The project was originated by Kubrick, who wrestled with it for years, but after he died, it was Spielberg who finally brought AI to the screen, to the annoyance of serious cinema fans who saw Spielberg's rank popularism as the polar opposite of Kubrick's somber style.
I'm David. So am I. Hello, David. Can you read? Can you sit down and we can read together? Let's be friends. You can't ever. I can't hear you. She's mine. And I'm the only one. I'm David!
Tell me about your relationship with Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick was a great recluse.
Well, I didn't think Kubrick was a recluse. I thought that was sort of a bad rap on him. I mean, you know, he didn't fly on airplanes for the last half of his life, but he wasn't a recluse because he had a lot of phone friends. And later on, he had a lot of fax friends. and I'm only sorry he didn't live long enough to get email, be able to have a laptop, you know. He was a craftsman to a fault. He was almost OCD as a movie maker, you know.
But is that why he couldn't make AI and why it was something that you could do?
He didn't want to make AI. I mean, he developed it for himself, and then he said, this is more you than me. And he began to produce it for me to direct. And we actually made a deal with Warner Brothers for Stanley to produce it, for me to direct it, based on Stanley's script with Ian Watson. And it was great. It was going to be a great relationship. And then I kept getting faxes from Stanley all night long. he'd get a thought about AI, and my fax machine would chatter, and eventually my wife said, Stanley, you have to stop living with us. And because the fax was in the bedroom, and it would go off at 2 or 3 in the morning, and my wife said, Stanley has become a bedfellow. You have to get that fax machine downstairs, which I did. And the amount of information he was giving me, including shots and where the camera should go, was so extraordinarily precise and detailed that I finally called him on the phone and said, Stanley, I can't direct this movie. These faxes are crying out to me to say to you, you have to direct it. This is your movie, and I withdrew from the project.
But after Kubrick died, Spielberg returned to AI, enraging hardcore Stanley files who vilified him for putting what they saw as a sentimental slant on Kubrick's stark vision.
Please, please make me into a real live boy.
All the blame I get for destroying Stanley's vision are scenes that Stanley actually came up with. The scenes that people can't believe that Stanley conceived and would have directed himself are the scenes that I'm most credited with spoiling AI. The whole ending where David and Teddy are actually rescued underwater, and when it turns to ice,
yes,
and brought into their own future of super mecha. This was Stanley and Ian's treatment. This was their 97-page treatment that I adapted into my screenplay.
The critical version of what a Kubrick movie is like, austere, cold, unsentimental, and the critical version of what a Spielberg movie is like, is then interpreted in the public imagination, and they get the two characters wrong.
They get it completely, diametrically wrong. But I think what's also interesting is, I think one of the things that scared Stanley away from AI was, it was too much of a film for me, and too little of the kind of movie that he is known for as a great cineast.
Since the controversy of AI, Spielberg has continued to pursue both serious and populist projects.
Now, the standard critical line has been to praise those serious films as evidence of a growing maturity, whilst dismissing the popcorn movies as mere crowd-pleasing throwbacks. But for me, Spielberg has always been at his best as an entertainer with hidden depths. For proof, look no further than a pair of movies, one spectacular, one serious, that he made back-to-back in 2005.
The piece of what have been called the Serene Olympics was shattered just before dawn this morning about 5.
Munich was the year's most controversial release, an account of Israel's ruthless tracking down of Palestinian terrorists in the wake of the 1972 Olympics massacre. A political drama in which every character gets to articulate their worldview at great length.
Tell me something, Ali.
What?
Do you really miss your father's olive trees? Do you honestly think you have to get back all that nothing, that chalky soil and stone huts? Is that what you really want for your children?
It absolutely is.
But at around the same time, he also found himself here, helming a spectacular remake of War of the Worlds. Now, Munich may have attracted the serious press headlines, but War of the Worlds is a more confident movie. Yes, it's a popcorn potboiler, but it's also quietly political in its own way.
I do think that they're both informed by post 9/11 impressions that I certainly took away from that fateful day. And I'll certainly acknowledge the fact that War of the Worlds has a lot of visual metaphors to 9/11.
Like the billboards of missing faces, or the ghostly grey dust which tumbles out of the sky, reminiscent of the aftermath of the Twin Towers disaster, this is a film about a society in shock. A classic Spielbergian story about another failed family man trying to protect his children while the world around him falls apart. Yet from the outside, it looks like just another big-budget sci-fi fantasy. Munich, on the other hand, wears its politics on its sleeve, dealing with a real-life subject which Spielberg and co-writer Tony Kushner knew would provoke controversy.
The fallout from Munich, much of it was the same old debate that is always stimulated by any discussion of Israel and the Palestinians. It's just a kick reflex. And I was warned by Tony Kushner a long time as we were working on the screenplay. He said, you know, the same factions that come after books and TV shows and individual lecturers are going to come after us when we release this picture.
I mean, I have absolutely no problem with the politics of Munich at all. If I have a problem with it, it's that it almost feels slightly like being made in the knowledge of the barrage of criticism that's going to come. So I think it's an extremely balanced movie. For me, almost too balanced.
I don't think so, because I didn't pull my punches. You know, I didn't say, okay, I'm going to give less story to the Palestinian Fedayeen and more story to the Israelis. It was always that way.
Yeah, no, but what I wonder is whether, does that necessarily serve it as the best possible film? Or in the way that, for example, the drama of War of the Worlds does? Or does it serve it as the best possible platform for an argument, for a discussion?
Well, you know, I wasn't really looking to make Munich the most cinematic movie of my life. I was very much wanting to make a 70s movie.
Yeah.
And I wanted to use the zoom lens more than I ever used it before. And I wanted to use a zoom lens on a handheld camera. You know, there's a sloppiness to that approach to cinema, which I thought was totally cinema verite, very relevant for that subject matter. I was simply trying to, you know, put the audience in the shoes of those 5 men, trying to struggle with both how do you find these targets, and then how do we find ourselves, and how do we allow ourselves to speak about how we're feeling about what we're doing after it starts to break us down.
While Munich created a political firestorm and became the movie everyone was talking about, War of the Worlds was the film that everyone actually went to see, raising questions about Spielberg's ability to do spectacular and serious with equal success. As he turns 60, Spielberg continues to confound those who wish to pigeonhole his extraordinarily varied output. His current projects range from the political biopic Lincoln to a 4th Indiana Jones movie. But as always, Spielberg isn't going to start the cameras rolling until he's sure the audience will get their money's worth.
When I'm thinking about Indiana Jones 4, I'm thinking about the audience, not myself. I'm thinking, what haven't they seen before? Because so many movies inspired by the Indiana Jones series have into themselves created tremendous set pieces. From the Matrix movies, I mean, you name it, there are so many genres inspired by what we did years and years ago that have basically scooped any possible original set piece for Indy 4 and leave us very little meat still to be picked off the bone. And until I can really guarantee the fans and the audiences that we have a story worth telling,
I can't forget how wonderful it was.
with scenes they'll never forget,
This is intolerable!
and an experience that will smell like a double dose of buttered popcorn, I don't want to make that movie.
What? I don't think the 4th film will have to compete with anything but itself. So we're working diligently and hard to try and get a script. If we can make it happen, I'd love it.
But it's got to be really good or we're not going to do it.
I would certainly love to read the script, but at the moment, to make me an offer I couldn't refuse.
I make no apologies for the fact that I've always preferred the populist side of Spielberg's filmmaking to more serious, critically acclaimed works like Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List. For me, it's films like Jaws, Close Encounters and E.T. which will stand the test of time as great works of pure cinema.
E.T., for instance, I think probably is his masterpiece, but most of us would probably agree.
I mean, I like Saving Private Ryan.
Empire of the Sun.
Schindler's List.
They're great cinematic moments in all of his movies.
What's the film that stands out for you, or the films that stand out for you as the thing which epitomise what you wanted to achieve in cinema?
Of my own movies?
Yes.
I think E.T. probably stands out to me as the film that epitomizes how everything can be really good someday if we all work together and stay together.
I'd go along with that. For me, E.T. is the work of someone who really understands the wonder of cinema and who's never forgotten that in order to engage an audience, you must first entertain them. And here's the key, because buried deep in all Spielberg's best films is a nostalgic love for the classic age of cinema. And that's a devotion which has kept him cutting his movies not digitally on computers, but on celluloid, on old-fashioned machines like these, where all the Hollywood greats first worked their magic.
It's the movie-making tradition that first fired Spielberg's young imagination and which he's proud to have continued into the 21st century.
An editing room with film smells like, well, it's the same smell that King Vidor smelled and D.W. Griffith smelled and Cecil B. DeMille smelled and John Ford smelled. I mean, it's the same smell that Kurosawa smells and Truffaut smells and Antonioni smells. It is the smell of our medium. And I'm going to rue the day when I, too, will be forced to conform when theaters convert to digital projection, and I'll have to convert as well. But I'll be the last to convert. My company won't. My company will be at the forefront of the conversion because I can't stop progress. But as a filmmaker, when I still have Final Cut and I still have the final choice of mediums with which to make my movies, I will always select film.
And is it because you do believe, as I believe, that there is something magical about that process? There is something almost alchemical about it?
There's something magical about having something as primitive sounding today as 24 pictures a second moving past a shutter gate with a light beam projecting on a big silver or white screen. I mean, it's magic. It's our forefathers. You know, the films we love the most were made in this process. It was good enough for them. Why isn't it still good enough for us?
Stephen, happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a great birthday present.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.